Hello people, it's been a few weeks and now I'm attempting to stream on 1080p as I had hoped to on the first occasion that I set up, but I didn't have the upload, and it turns out after a visit from an NBN tech today that we've been transmitting with a cable with considerable corrosion on it. I'm not sure whether it was in the pit or in a connection to our wall, but whichever way it goes, this is the first test to see that I can stream adequately. And I haven't seen anything pop up yet. Oh, there we go. And it looks like it's got an excellent connection. But I haven't used this for quite a while. So just for the sake of having something on the stream, I'll read from this book, which is Restoring Baird's Image by Don McLean, a chap who's done a lot of restoration of Baird's phonovision discs made in 1927, and they were the first video recordings as such anywhere. I'll read the foreword to the book. Well, what's the good of it when you've got it? What useful purpose will it serve? Frith Street, London, on a cold, wet January night in 1926, the group of eminent scientists from the Royal Institution had struggled up a series of dank, narrow stairs to witness the demonstration of a new invention. On the whole, they weren't impressed. While most of them felt that the shrouded equipment hid some trickery, some went so far as to denounce the inventor as an absolute swindler. Hello, we've got a problem with the stream already. The stream's current bit rate 1655. Hello to the visitors there. We recommended that you use a stream bit rate of 4,500 kilobytes. That's interesting because I've set it to 4,000. Well, let's keep this going and just see how long it will keep up. And for the person looking in, you might like to make yourself known on the chat box. I've just got to arrange the lighting here a bit more equitably. Do a bit of that and see if that put up the flicky. There it goes, and hopefully that'll give me a little bit more frontal light. I'm currently streaming at a higher rate than I normally do, and the stream says the stream's current bitrate, 1655.5, is lower than the recommended bitrate. We recommend you use a stream bitrate of 4500. I wonder why running less than the normal bitrate would cause it to flicker. Well, I'll have a look at the stream in replay later on. It's now 9:41. I thought at this time of the night would be the time when we're most likely to run into problems. I'll see if I can bring up some video clips for you, and I have some silent ones here somewhere, except I've forgotten how to. Oh yes, we use the OBS software, and I'll bring up a media source, click on that and go to desktop and to okay, I'll see if I can do a commentary on the following documentary. This was Columbia, the Columbia Gramophone Company's factory in Wandsworth in London, filmed in about the middle of 1928. We've been able to date this very scratched silent film in this very ratty sort of a transfer by the fact that Igor Stravinsky is filmed conducting his Petrushka ballet, and he recorded that in, I think, June or July of 1928, so that's an approximate date for this film. Let's have a look at it. How a Columbia record is made, 1928. Roy Travers and Stanley Mumford were involved with documentary filmmaking during much of the late silent period, and here's an overview of the Wandsworth factory of Columbia. Quite a large business. The recording of discs on wax was only a very small part of their operation. The first step in the production of a record is the manufacture of the wax recording disc, and they do this by mixing, saponifying as they call it, stearine, by mixing it with sodium hydroxide, caustic soda. Samples of the materials are first tested by the chemists, and so here are the Columbia Company's chemists all checking materials for the master wax with great care. The master wax had to be absolutely smooth and homogeneous, boiling the raw wax, which is first filtered and poured into moulds. That's a heated trough there. You'll see the blocks of stearine going in. And pardon me, but that's the transmitter in the background. And heating the wax, that's some sort of a pump that they're pumping in the heated caustic soda. Rather nasty stuff down that. And here the chap preparing the wax is heating a wax master mould, tin mould, like a pie pan, pie flan. Pours in the wax, and that's set to cool. It has to be cooled very carefully so that it doesn't crystallize and cause noise in the cutting. The wax was about 2 inches thick, and very roughly could be knocked out of the can because it would shrink away from the sides of the can as it cooled. The wax was then roughly trimmed so that it could go into a proper lathe, and this is to smooth off the surface. This is the first rough smoothing of the surface in a vertical lathe so that the shaved wax can fall away from the face of the wax as it's shaved. Here we go, shave, 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 from the outside to the inside slowly, and there are bits of swarf coming off, as you can see. And the last operation was to cut it with a sapphire cutter to make it absolutely shiny, so that the cutting stylus would have no noise running over any irregularities. And there it is, being finally polished. As you see, thick piece of wax, light brown colour in its original form. The Columbia waxes, there is one in the Museum of Victoria, derived from a museum display on sound recording that the Museum of Vic put together about 1930. They still have all the parts of that display in storage. Lady here is putting a master number on and putting it into a cardboard container, carefully padded. Then they took the wax to the recording studio where it was put into a heating sort of a cupboard. And here we are in the Columbia studio, Western Electric double button carbon mic on the left there, recording that cellist. And the entrance to the recording studio. Please do not attempt to enter this room while the red light is glowing. And I think we look up at the red light at this point. A bit like most broadcasting studios. If you're wondering what the top classical watermark is at the top right there, that's that's the Western Electric amplifier, audio amplifier driving the cutter head. There's the microphone sitting on its battery box. The recording wax is placed on the electric recording machine. As you'll see in the moment, the recording machine, the wax is taken out of a sort of a heating cupboard, which you can see there. It's heated to be quite warm before it's cut. And there's the recording machine. On the left, that whitish box is a regulator that is driven by a falling weight. Falling weight drive drove the turntable, rather like a cuckoo clock being driven by a falling weight. And the turntable in this case moved laterally as the recording head, which you see on the right there, a rubber line recorder so-called, stayed still. Travelling turntable recorder. There's Igor Stravinsky conducting his Petrushka suite. I think it was released on about 5 double-sided 12-inch discs eventually. Igor Stravinsky and the Columbia Orchestra. And as I said earlier, this is about June 1928. Stravinsky looking typically thin and pinched. And the orchestra doing their best with a piece of very modern music, full of atonalism and really at the cutting edge of music, classical music as it was then. Flutes, bassoon, flutes again and the woodwinds, percussion, xylophone, timpani, kettle drum, violins, harps. There are 3 harps in this film. I've listened carefully to the recording, couldn't hear the harps there, but still. Perhaps they were just poorly mixed. And there's the mic, and there's the recording almost cut. Stravinsky going for his life. Okay, watch the disc. It's pulled out sideways. The turntable actually was driven by a thread, so it would move slowly sideways as it rotated. And of course they had dance music. I think this dance orchestra is actually Ray Starita and the Ambassadors Orchestra, who cut quite a few Columbia records at this time. That's Ray Starita with the glasses on the right there. Also cutting records. It's probable that Ray Starita sold an awful lot more than Stravinsky ever did, but Stravinsky was the prestige performer. And there's the galvanometer on the audio amp kicking back and forth in rhythm to the dance orchestra's audio output. Now watch this. He stops the recording machine. He lifts the recording head. That horn on the right there is a test playback device. They cut a few grooves on the outside edge of the wax just to make sure the balance is right, and then they record further in. Recording engineers inspecting the final cut. And the wax gets stored away again. The recorded wax is carefully examined. They had to make sure that there was no, as they called it, lipping on the edge of the grooves, which would make it difficult for the copper matrix to come away from the wax master after it had been electroplated. And this purports to be a view of the audio modulation, the lateral modulation of the audio in the grooves. Back into a protective box, and off it goes to the electroplating department, preparing the Waxmaster record to obtain a copper negative by electrode deposition. So they would first of all take the Waxmaster out of the box, and now they coat it with extremely finely divided graphite powder. Watch closely. First of all, they put a metal ring around the Waxmaster that gives the electrical contact that's necessary. Now, inspection of the wax, and this is the man actually rubbing finely divided graphite carbon powder into the wax, and that makes it electrically conductive, so then they can plate copper onto it to make a negative record. Gee, he's using a lot of graphite too. Watch, polish, 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 and then they pour off the residue, and what you get left with is a black wax master with a conductive surface. Still very shiny, must have been incredibly finely divided graphite powder. And there is the graphited wax master on the bar in which it'll be dunked into the electroplating bath. After further treatment, bit of dusting to make sure that there's no loose graphite powder, and washed with distilled water. In it goes into the copper sulfate solution with a good bit of voltage applied to it. It's immersed for 16 hours in the electroplating tank to build up a nice deposit of copper. But they couldn't use the copper for pressing the shellac records because it would oxidize at high temperatures. To do that, they had to produce a so-called mother record out of nickel. A copper negative is formed by electric action on the wax, which has now finished its task. So we strip the copper off the wax. This is agitation in the electroplating baths. Out it comes, bit of a wash, and there's a thick conducting surface of copper, a negative version of the record. You take off the outer ring and now separate the copper from the wax. There we go, and there's the negative record, the master matrix. The original copper negative is used to produce other negatives called shells, otherwise known as metal mothers. And I'll turn off that radio in the background. The electroplating tanks, you can see that Columbia was producing quite a few stampers from wax masters simultaneously. And this is the making of the metal mother, I think. Separating the nickel mother from the copper. There we go. Beautiful nickel mother record. And from that, a stamper, also made of nickel, which can withstand high temperatures and pressures, was made so that they could put it into a press. Just trimming the edge there. There we go. Beautiful metal mother record. They were stored away in a master matrix store. One wishes one could get access to that store these days to find all of the material that they didn't release, which might actually be more interesting in retrospect than some of the stuff they did. Some views of a Columbia electro-deposition plant. Look at the size of this joint. Imagine how much three-phase power would have been put through rotary converters to energize those electroplating tanks. You can see the big galvanometers on the wall indicating how much current is being drawn. And there are the rotary converters. That's the way you convert AC to DC in those days. They're basically Jenny motors. A lot of power involved. The original copper negatives are placed in covers and stored in fireproof vaults. This is the master matrix store, with girls actually cataloguing what they've got there. It's all like a big library. Oh, if only we could get access to those metals now. We could produce reissues that were so much better than the worn shellac pressings that have come down to us over the last 95 odd years. Now we'll see how the record is made, that is, pressed. And that's an indistinct picture of the press room. Preparing the materials. This was a major part of making a shellac record, as Columbia records are 3-ply, having a superfine non-scratch surface and an inner strengthening core. They're quite complex in their design. It was produced to a patent designed by William Force. I think the patent 3-ply record of Columbia was introduced about 1921. And they had impeccably quiet surfaces compared to their bisque competitors of HMV. The surface material is mixed on a steam-heated roller and after cooling is pulverized, and you'll see this in operation. Really heavy machinery. In those days, if you made a record, it had to be supported by a major industrial complex. There was no direct playback except from wax cylinders. And there's all the shellac material, slate dust, all being mixed together. Varieties, I think, also were involved, or barium sulfate, which we now know as barium meal, the heavy component of 78 RPM discs. And that guy has asbestos gloves on, because that stuff is at very high temperature. Here's one of the grinding machines for the shellac constituents, and as you can see, it is heavy machinery. Not much of it very well kept from human contact, so the chances of industrial accidents here was fairly high. This is putting shellac biscuits in, which are being crushed up, and the dust that comes from them is taken away. There you go. Yeah, stick your hand in it, it's probably toxic. Oh, how OH&S has changed this. Another grinding machine. And note the size of these things. All belt driven. At least they put some screen mesh around it to keep hands away. Discs are covered with the superfine surface material. This surface material was put onto discs of kraft paper, and these girls are feeding the line and checking the surfaces to see that they're all evenly coated. So these were 3-ply records, 2 plies, the 2 streams coming towards us are one side of the record and the other, with the centre being made of a stronger, tougher material. But these surface discs, these surface plies, were a very fine material that could take an impression well. There's a lady showing how messy it all is. The core material, while hot, is rolled out and formed into small slabs. The core material was the strong backing that made the records close to unbreakable unless you threw them across a room, of course. Columbia records I'm referring to, HMV being bisque, are a bit more fragile. This is preparing the central core material. Oh God, mate, keep your hand out of there, otherwise you'll lose it. Lots of surface material coming out of a roller machine. On this conveyor it's cooled and broken into squares. The square is 1 per disc, per 78 RPM pressing, that is. And here it comes. And this guy has to, I think, break it into slabs like biscuits. There we go. Roll, roll, roll. Imagine doing this all day. The RSI must have been incredible. Again, they're very hot, and he's holding them in asbestos gloves. Printing the Columbia labels, another operation necessary in the factory. If you look closely, you'll see the Columbia Magic Notes trademark on each of those labels. Up the top there. And they were cut out into circles. Each record is moulded in hydraulic presses under a pressure of 60 tons. So you keep your hand out of those presses too. The copper negative is now fitted into the hydraulic press. Well, it's actually not a copper negative, it's a nickel-plated copper negative so that it doesn't oxidize in the high temperatures. It's screwed into place. Metal retaining ring is put on the press. Columbia presses were rather unusual. They had reasonably light sort of a sandwich, like a, how would you describe it, like a toast maker. You'd put in your surface material, then the core material, then the other surface, and then the label. And then in the press, slide it forward, 60 tons and lots of heat from steam, and out comes a pressed record, 3-ply pressed record. Another one, squash, bottom label, bottom surface, core material, top surface craft paper, and top label. Down into the press, slide it in, 60 tons of pressure and lots of heat, and there's all the pressure being put on. I imagine that's all steam driven as well. Steam powered. There would have been a lot of fuel used to produce these. I think they used to sell the pressings at that time for about 4 and 6pence each, which is fairly high price for 6 minutes of music, 3 minutes each side. So the pressman would go on with this routine, on and on and on, pressing literally thousands of discs each day. Top surface, top label, press. Here's a view of some of the presses in the press room. There's quite a few working simultaneously, and the girls at the back of the pressman are packing the records into a series of heaps on a spindle with pieces of protective paper in between, and they were checking them. Some of the oil-fired furnaces supplying steam to the presses. Again, big industrial scale. Unbelievable. Looks like the steam room of the Titanic. At each stage of manufacture, every record is examined. Girls with very good eyesight were needed for this. Here we are. They flip the record over, put it in a protective piece of paper, and then stick the next one on the heap. And they do this over and over again, day after day, those poor girls. These days we do it by duplicating MP3s. Very different. And these girls, I'm not quite sure what they're doing here, it isn't identified, but I think they're actually playing test records occasionally. Periodical tests are being made of the physical capabilities of the record. This is testing the tensile strength of the record. Screw, 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 crack. And he takes note of the pressure required to do that to make sure that the records they're producing are of requisite strength to withstand transport and usage, of course, because they didn't want too many breakages between the factory and the dealer. There's the 3-ply record, the core material, the craft paper, and the fine surfaces. The edges and surfaces are polished and the records are placed in their envelopes. This is getting the rough edges off the record with an emery board, which you'll see in a moment. Look closely, they're putting those into a sort of a clamp, then rotating them at high speed and rubbing the rough edges off the records. Columbia Cricket Club ball being advertised at the back there. 12-inch discs by the looks of it. Probably the Petrushka ballet music that Igor Stravinsky was seen recording earlier. An inspector going along the line and the girls put them into their covers and off they go to the boxing department. That is packaging, not fighting. The finished records are conveyed to the stock room on little manual forklifts like that. And up they go in a little lift, and there are the girls boxing the records for dispatch to the various dealers around the world. They're checked, boxed and sent to the Dispatch Department. He's checking the number, and she gets a Columbia box out, very nicely printed, and then puts on it details of the contents in terms of the musical selection or whatever. This girl is actually making up the boxes from square pieces of cardboard, sort of a stapling machine that. And here the boxes I think are being weighed and sent down a chute. And from the chute they go into big crates for dispatch. Finally packed in cases and dispatched to all corners of the earth. Take a close look at the corners that they're being sent to from the stencils on these. Let's see what we can recognise here. In they go, along with what looks like wood shavings to keep them from moving about in transit. Johannesburg via Algoa Bay. Well, we know where that's going. One to Paris, one to Stockholm, there's one to Constantinople on the left there, probably some Turkish records in there. They did record foreign stuff occasionally at Columbia. And off in the latest truck, where no doubt they were being sent to the dealer. The day's work over, we see the workers coming out of the factory. There's the steam whistle. And down a street in Wandsworth depart the many employees of the Columbia Record Factory, who unfortunately would soon be facing a depression and the precipitous collapse of much of the recording industry. In 1931, Columbia merged with HMV and this factory actually closed. This factory was used for making Airfix models of World War I and World War II planes, which many of you probably were brought up on. Two girls, two flappers, about to demonstrate the product on the latest Columbia Vivatonal gramophone. And that's a test pressing playing, I can tell by the label. How did they get the test pressing? Must have knocked it off the factory, I guess. Oh, it's the Charleston, is it? I see. Probably the Race to Rita record we saw being played earlier. Ah, there he is, Race to Rita. And so our documentary on the Columbia record concludes. And that was from 1928. Okay. Let's see if we had much in the way of interruptions on that. I don't think we did. And we've been running for about 20 minutes, so if this has no problem, on Saturday night I shall try again. Just explaining for the people that are watching on the YouTube live stream this test at the moment. We've had immense problems with our internet connection, and today, just today, Wednesday, we had an NBN engineer come out, check our connection, and found that there was considerable oxidation in the connections, the terminations in either our PIT or the cable connection to the outside world. So they've fixed that, but for the sake of getting assured upload, we're arranging with Optus to have a new plan with 4G backup on our internet, so that if the internet should fail on Saturday via the cable out the front, a 4G wireless, a 4G connection to the exchange will take over to give us at least some basic upload speed. So from now on, I think we can be assured of more constant connection and a great deal more definition. And I'm running about twice the upload speed that I have on previous weeks at the moment. Okay, would anybody care to make themselves known? I don't think so. So we'll conclude the test at this point, hoping to see people on a Saturday night, and I'll have a close look at this to see if we've got any frozen frames or whatever. Thank you for watching, people. We'll catch